Before we begin, I wanted to give a huge shout out to the folks at Amazon Music for partnering with us on this episode of the Inside Line F1 podcast. But more on this later. Right then, let's get right into today's episode. With a very proud face and a big smirk on my face, I can now say that, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to India's best sports podcast. And you're also listening to the Inside Line F1 podcast's Canadian GP review. Again, I'm so happy that I butcher up the sense of time. It's not the Canadian GP review canal, it's the preview. But again, we have an award now. So all these small little things are okay, right?
Yeah, exactly. We have an award, the best sports podcast in India. I'm humbled. I'm over the moon. I am excited for what we've built together. Somil, Sundaram, Mithila, myself, the legions of fans, the legions of listeners. And I know that this stamp is just the best sports podcast in India. But I also know through our platform collaborations at Spotify and Listen Notes, we are pretty much the top 1.5% of all podcasts in the world. And Samuel, what's really strange, this whole Americanization of Formula One that's happened. We actually won a podcasting award. There was a silver medal that we won in America in 2022, the end of 2022, early 23. Yeah. So there's actually a second award in 2 years.
Yeah, it's crazy. And seriously, I mean, when we went on stage to receive it, it was just such a special moment to see that, wow, what we're building with the Inside Line F1 podcast is being recognized. And you folks who've been with us from the very start of the journey, or for some of you who are just joining in, you are making it all happen. So thank you. Thank you for listening into yet another episode of the Inside Line F1 podcast. And thank you for supporting us all the way through to get to this stage. Which is why now we should reward you for your support and ask stupid questions, which is what we always do on the podcast, right? We love asking stupid questions. Sometimes we talk about what's the coolest title you can have as the head of a state, which we found out in San Marino is something very cool, but I can't quite remember. Was it head dean or something? I don't remember. What was it?
Something. Captain, was it? I can't remember. But
some captain.
But since I already mentioned we had an award in America, and I did mention the name. It was the Muse Awards, and we actually won under the audio podcast category. And in America, we are represented by Evergreen Podcasts, which is a big podcast network as well. So if you're hearing this in America and the podcast is carrying some ads, it's all thanks to the Evergreen Podcast that comes. But are we still now talking of San Marino? Because
Yeah. There's a reason behind that. There's a reason why I mentioned San Marino. Because again, I mentioned on the Inside Line F1 podcast, you and I ask a lot of stupid questions to each other. Again, one of which is what is the coolest head of state name, which in San Marino is the captain's regent. But an evergreen question we always can ask, which is also very stupid, is why are we doing the Canadian GP in the month of May? Even though we just were in Monaco a week ago. And we go to European races after that.
Yeah.
What's this all about?
Well, it's Formula One saying we want to be sustainable. We want to be net carbon zero by 2030. But that doesn't mean in 2024 we're going to actually become net carbon zero and have more sustainable plans and so on. No, but in all seriousness, they're trying to club these pieces of the calendar together. Canada's always been in June because of better weather conditions. And that's been one of the main reasons, but they're trying to, again, move that around and bunch all the races up. And the promoters, sort of from what I gather, are a little concerned because if you suddenly have 5 North American races together, you put Mexico and Las Vegas and Austin, Texas, and all of that within 6-8 weeks of each other. The concern is, are you sort of rubbing the whole, the slate out.
Genie out of the bottle too quickly.
Yeah, in too little time. But yes, conventional wisdom would say if you're going to Monaco, please just continue racing in Europe and call this a European leg of the season, which I'm told is being looked at.
Yeah. And the reason why we're here in Canada is no, we're not here in Canada. We wish we were here in Canada, but the reason why Formula One's going to Canada is to eat some wind. 31 kilometers per hour winds are expected this weekend, Kunal. And you mentioned something interesting while we were preparing, and we mentioned this point. Fun test for Ferrari, right?
Absolutely.
Lots of windy conditions now.
Absolutely. We've always remembered how Carlos Sainz has said, our car doesn't like the wind or the change in wind conditions. And the usual joke we've cracked is, but hey, aren't Formula One cars designed in a wind tunnel, which basically is a tunnel with a big fan that throws wind at you, right? So we've always joked about it. So the wind should be a factor this weekend. Canada's motto is from sea to sea. And I believe from that sea to sea is where all that wind comes in. But 40 million is almost the population of Canada. They just have one race for those 40 million people. But I must say it's a very...
1 second. Are you talking about population ratio to race? We have 1 point... How many?
4 billion?
4 billion?
Yeah, and nobody wants to race.
Formula One? Are you listening? What's up?
Yeah. But I have to say this. The Canadian Grand Prix has been around... I think it's going to be the 53rd Canadian Grand Prix. So it's been around for a really long time. I think this is also the third venue that's been the Mosport Park and somewhere else, and now in Montreal.
Mont-Tremblant?
There you go. You, of course, know these historical references. But 70 laps, you're back to 3 DRS zones. Formula One is saying you missed all the overtaking in Monaco. Worry not. We'll give you some overtaking, at least the chance of it, in Canada. But typically, it's just the back straight where you see an overtake that happens into the chicane, which ends with the Wall of Champions. Sometimes, if you're really lucky and you've got a bad exit, you might get overtaken into turns 1 and 2, which, by the way, is also called the Senna S, because that's what it looks like from the helicopter. But fun fact, this is the 1110th race for Formula One. So that's 1110 Formula One races in history. And I know you remember everything from all of them.
No, I don't. I don't even remember what happened 2 races ago.
That's the thing.
To be honest with you, sometimes we've got so many of them.
Yeah, but that's the challenge with people like you. If I ask you, Saumil, what happened at the 2024 Monaco Grand Prix, you'll remember only in 2044. You won't remember now. It's like, I have to ask you what happened.
You're catching me out now. Don't expose me like this in public. But you're so right. Yeah, it's exactly that case. Yeah, the recency non-bias is so strong, and it's insane to the point that when you ask yourself, okay, what do you remember from the Canadian GP? What are some of the best moments that you can ever recollect? I don't remember anything after Jenson Button's win in 2011, genuinely. Or maybe that 2014 race where we had lots of chaos and Felipe Massa crashing on the last lap. That was a good one.
With Checo Perez, didn't he? Yeah.
Exactly. And Ricardo won one of his first races in his career. Incredible. See, those are things you remember.
And Ricardo started from 6, so one of those rare races where the front row didn't end up winning, because in Canada, 8 out of the last 12 races have been won from pole position, and 10 out of the last 12 races have been won from the front row. So the 2 races that weren't won from the front row was 2014 Ricardo, and then 2011 Jenson Button from 7th place.
Yeah. And must have been even before that Robert Kubica, right? 2008 when Lewis Hamilton just casually bumped onto the back of Kimi Raikkonen's car and said, here's my parting gift for losing the 2007 World Championship. Thank you very much, and I'll leave from here. Like that's basically what happened in that one as well.
And I remember that incident because Kimi walked out and he just sort of tapped Lewis's helmet, like tap, the kind of tap George Russell gave to Valtteri Bottas in Imola a couple of years ago when he was in Williams and Valtteri was in Mercedes. But you're right. The memories from Canada, since you say that, Wall of Champions, several memories of people just driving into it, and that's one memory.
But can you believe it? It's been 3 decades since that Wall of Champions thing was initially classified, and after that, not many champions have really crashed there.
Yeah,
which makes me. Yeah. It's like one of those sad nicknames that used to be really good at one point of time, but now it's like, but when will a champion crash here now? Because the last crash I remember was what was it? One of the Haas's crashed here, right? A couple of years ago, front stretch.
Yeah.
You lost it on the curbs.
Yeah, I think it was Magnussen. Was he even around at that time? I can't remember.
Bloody.
Yeah, but you're right.
Yeah, I think he was. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But Kerbs, let's talk about that for a
Yeah.
second because, funnily enough, we are hearing so many stories and so many reports of Red Bull Racing being atrocious, apparently, in their own words. I mean, not exactly same words, but again, you get the sentiment. But they're not really the best on the curbs, and Monaco was a clear outlier. 2 points of it, the way they ride over it vertically, and then also how the car reacts to it horizontally. But the whole point is Canada has tons of them. I mean, that whole Wall of Champions chicane is a big part. You go to the second and third sector where there's lots of chicanes with lots of high curbs and lots of sausage curbs as well if you get them wrong. So for Red Bull, it's another chance to test their hypothesis about just how terrible that car can be over the curbs if it really is that bad.
Yeah, that's a good point because over the years we've always been told Canada's a street circuit, semi-street circuit, but in reality, it's a permanent race facility which is open to the public for walking, skating, running. I think cycling was banned for a few years, but it's now allowed. But and cars can drive around, but it's not a road track, or if you know, it's not like a regular
Yeah, yeah.
road that you see in Monaco. It's being used
So
around. So
correct me if I'm wrong. Kind of like Singapore Main Street, right? Like that whole piece is just shut off to the world, which is apparently so called a street bit, but it's only used for events or
correct.
just for
Yeah,
people to
yeah.
drive around. Yeah,
And it's
similar.
on a man-made island, which is something we'll hear all the commentators say it 3,000 times this race weekend. Notre Dame and this island, and it's been a part of the Olympics. And in fact, there's a water basin, which is a rectangular water basin just at the backside of the circuit, which is used for water sports, rowing, and
Oh,
all of that.
hey.
But Samuel, it just bums me, do Canadians not have boats? Like, in America, typically you just create a piece of land, don't put water and call it a marina, and then everybody calls it a marina and sells expensive tickets. Why can't they do that at the Gilles Villeneuve circuit? They have water. It's right next to, the circuit is surrounded by water. Okay. But anyway,
We only do the good stuff for Miami.
Yeah.
We only do the good stuff for
but
Miami.
everyone listening in from Canada, from America, from around the world, this is just pure sarcasm. Okay, I know that the land is of course elevated, and you don't, if you're watching it from a yacht, you want access and visibility of the circuit, which is what Gilles Villeneuve doesn't offer. But memories, 20. I have to ask you. You'll now you'll remember. It's a little old maybe, but
Uh-huh.
two world champions fighting P1, P2. One of them misses a corner, then goes and
Yes.
switches the bollard because he gets a penalty post race. You know who I'm talking of.
Yes, yes. You see, it's interesting because 2021, 22, around that, I think 22 when the race came here, I was completely in a blind spot remembering Sebastian Vettel and that 2019 race. But now that it's been 5 years, 5 years, I remember it clear as daylight. It's the past bias. Maybe someday we'll remember what exactly happened at the 2022 French GP as well at some point. Do you remember what happened there?
Was there a French Grand Prix in 22? I have no clue.
Was there even? But yeah, well, I mean, but that's the sort of thing. Legitimately, coming back to all the serious points about the race, could really happen because in that generation of cars, it was obviously harder to follow. But the circuit is such that it gives you so many opportunities to come around and be close to each other. Not really the fastest corners, but lots of flowing ones. The walls are always close by. And because you've got those two long straights in the last and the first sector, there's tons of openness. And that really means that you can be along a lot of times. And of course, drivers will prefer to be away from each other so that they can cool down their cars. But as the stints get longer and as you come towards the end of the race, we've seen lots of drivers getting better. Same thing in 2014 with Perez and the Williams. Same thing in 2019 with Vettel as well, before he tapered off towards the very end. Same thing last year. Carlos Sainz was very, very good. And that was particularly towards the end of the stint. So watch for that in Canada. And also, maybe also watch for just how much the curbs impact Red Bull. Because if they were terrible in Monaco, that's largely down to the fact that there were not really other places where they could gain a lot of time. With Montreal, there's lots of other open corners, lot more corners than Monaco comparatively, and a lot more places where they can really gain time. So Red Bull shouldn't be that bad. But that only means that we get to see a fair competition between them, McLaren and Ferrari, which is better for us.
Yes. which is absolutely the one narrative we want, which is a narrative which we will keep playing up, because Max Verstappen has said, come Barcelona, he's going to have it easy when the track is smooth. But we're all like, hey, can we just put bumps in every track? Like Bernie wanted to put sprinklers at every track to spice it up. I was like, can we just put bumps in every track? But in all seriousness, like I said, it's a permanent race circuit, not really used too much apart from all the races that, it's contracted to 3 DRS zones. A short pit lane, 18.5 seconds under green conditions, 9.5 under, virtual safety car conditions. And since 2015, there's been almost a 50% chance of an SC and a VSC. So expect that to be a part of the strategy. Always ends up being a 2-stopper race as well. So that's something we could look forward to this weekend. And there's one more thing to look forward to, Samuel, which is the driver who actually is going to call this a home race.
Home race? Yeah. We do have a driver with a home race, yeah. And wait, does he have a grandstand as well now? Must have, right?
He has actually had a grandstand for a few seasons now. By the way, that grandstand is fully sold out already.
Wait, like his seat. Like the Lance Stroll seat has been sold out. Same way the Lance Stroll grandstand is gone as well.
Yeah. Here's the interesting thing. That's a bloody good reference. Okay. There are terms to his grandstand seat, much like every other grandstand, but I'm going to extrapolate this. It's 635 Canadian dollars for a 3-day ticket. But there is a possibility of 3 different people attending over 3 days of the race weekend. I think that's what should be a part of Lance Stroll's contract as well. 3 different drivers should be permitted to drive that car at 3 different times in the year or whatever, at least gets more people. But it's at the end of the hairpin on the left side, just before you accelerate up that left kink, I would say. That's where the Lance Stroll grandstand is. So that's sold out.
I'm not going to go for all the Lance Stroll slander today, though. He's outqualified Fernando Alonso twice now.
Yeah, and that's a bit of a strange thing because Fernando was out qualifying the car and himself and Lance Stroll in the first 5 races of the season. The last 3 races, Fernando's had atrocious qualifying. He didn't even make it to Q3, 3 races in a row, which is abysmal. But that's just the nature of Aston Martin. I think they're just settling in still. Every time they bring upgrades, the car just becomes bad and undrivable. They take a few races in, then they settle, and then they're back somewhere. So that's what happened in 2023. That's probably what's happening now as well. But I do believe they will bounce back. And what a race to bounce back at if it is Canada.
Wait, but that reminds me, do you know where they were in 2023 after the Monaco Grand Prix?
I don't know. Were they? You mean
so
on the table? I thought maybe they were in a party somewhere.
In the table, yeah.
For missing out on the race win in 2023.
No, but they must have been. They must have been because after Monaco 2023, Aston Martin had 120 points and was second. Fernando Alonso was third in the Drivers' Championship with 93 points. Lance Stroll was 8th with 27 points. Believe you me, the same Aston Martin this year in the constructors' standings, well, what can I say? A grand total of 44 points in 5th. The mighty have fallen so bad. Like a year makes an entire year's worth of difference. Original line, right? That's a good one.
Yeah. And Yuki Tsunoda is actually ahead of Lance Stroll in the constructors or in the drivers' championship, right? Which in itself is a pretty interesting thing because that's just how it goes. But let's see how Lance Stroll goes. His best finish in Canada has been 9th over all these years. And then there's another driver, a Canadian driver, who's faded away into oblivion, Nicolas Latifi. I wonder if he's going to show up in the paddock and is going to show his face because last we know that he was taking a break to go and study. So maybe he takes a break from his studies to come and attend the Grand Prix. But I don't think anyone wants to hear his stories. So probably he's just not of interest to, because, typically former drivers come to meet teams. Nobody's interested in signing him, even though so many driver seats are available, or media wants to talk to them and get some perspective of what they've been up to. But Sorry, Nicholas, but that's pretty much about it, I guess.
I want to hear his stories. After he's done with his education, let's actually try to get him on the show, no? That'll be cool, yeah. If we can
Let's do it.
just, yeah, just know what it's like to be Nicholas Latifi. And generally, like the whole mentality of being a pay driver, like, do they know the expectations that have been set up against them? Do they know that the expectations are lower for them compared to the teammates in the other car?
That's
How
a
do you deal with that
brilliant
mentally,
question.
the whole psychology? That'll be fun. That'll be fun to hear, yeah.
Yeah. But let's get back to serious stuff because you said McLaren,
Serious
Red
stuff.
Bull,
Oh god,
Ferrari.
that's a dagger, dagger to Latifi's heart.
Yeah, I mean, probably got
But I
stabbed
get you.
several years ago when he didn't get a renewal despite paying all the millions. But coming to McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull, of course, we spoke Red Bull. Will they handle the curbs? The interesting thing for me, Somil, is in Monaco, McLaren were the quicker car, but obviously Ferrari and Charles Leclerc won. Okay.
Yep.
And that's just how Monaco is. So I'd love to see where that pecking order has fallen with all the upgrades and everyone extracting everything that they can. McLaren, for the record, have had the most wins for any teams with 13 wins and most poles for any team with 11 poles, right? So
Wow.
that's McLaren's might. And I think they've not got any poles in the last week. Not week. Technically, they've not had it since a week, but they've not had a pole for over a decade out here, I would say. So that's the interesting part. But the most interesting part about McLaren is their car has gone quicker in slow corners, and they're like, we don't know, its car's over delivering, and we're going to try and find out what's happening. And that's the most McLaren-like thing that could happen to McLaren. Imagine Ron Dennis, who just celebrated his 77th birthday a couple of days ago, probably reads that and he's like, my goodness, they've built a fast car and they don't know why it's going fast.
I guess we'll take it and we'll see what's on.
Yeah.
It's, no plans, just vibes. That's what the McLaren motto seems to be like. We'll figure it out. But you're right about that. The whole faster car debate is one that keeps evolving because, again, as we go to more circuits, we find out that some circuits work better for some cars than the other ones. And this traditionally, given the way McLaren's car functions, this should be a really good one for them. We've got tons of medium speed corners, tons of low speed ones as well. It's just a matter of driving now. And in Monaco, Leclerc was the ace driver. He really smashed it out of the park. Can McLaren nail that one qualifying lap? And knowing that Red Bull are going to be better here than Monaco, because obviously it's a longer circuit, more straights, plays into their hands, more higher speed corners compared to Monaco, so they'll obviously be more comfortable. Then it'll come into the fray even more so. So that's going to be a genuinely fun story to watch about who really pulls together that lap, because no longer do we have Verstappen, Buffer, then the other teams. It's all coming together. And that means more excitement for all of us.
Absolutely. For the record, the last McLaren pole was 2010 with Lewis Hamilton. So Piastri and Norris have the opportunity. Can you imagine 15 years and they still have the most number of pole positions and wins for a team, right? But you're right, the driver...
But that tells a story. That's sorry to cut in, but that tells a story that this circuit never really fits in well for just anyone, because even while Mercedes was dominating, Red Bull won here a few times.
Yeah.
Even when Mercedes was dominating towards the end of their reign, Ferrari were close to winning. And even in Red Bull's 100% clean domination, it's not always just been them. Aston Martin were close to getting pole with Alonso last year. So it's not a clear-cut scenario of one car, one track like Barcelona or Spa. It still has a lot in it.
That's a beautiful insight because especially with the field as close as it is now, we've been seeing Q1 is separated by 1.1 second. The driver is actually making such a big difference, more than anything else in the car. And Leclerc, of course, nailed it. He could score his 25th pole position this weekend, also his 7th race win in Formula One. But some more interesting Leclerc stats. He's on a 17 race point scoring streak, which, believe it or not, is his longest, right? And somewhere, I don't believe he's recently made a typical mistake, because when I think of a mistake,
Yeah.
I remember Miami last year when changing wind conditions and he just spun and went in. But so it's also a streak of a mistake-less race execution weekend that he's
Yeah.
had. And of course, Leclerc's been on the podium 3 consecutive races. And believe it or not, Samuel, his longest streak for being Charles Leclerc and having driven that Ferrari since 2019, his longest streak of pole positions, or rather, longest streak of podiums, is just 5. Can you imagine?
Leclerc's longest streak of podiums is just 5 races.
Yes.
Oh,
Painful.
wow.
Unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah, that'll change. That'll change for sure. But that just creates a question in my mind that I'd love to know your perspective on this and how you see the sport. But have you noticed that after Carlos Sainz got his first win, he became a different driver? After Lando Norris has gotten his first win, he's attacking with intensity like he's never done. And now that we see Charles Leclerc finally getting that big win after those many years, do you think that can really unlock a different gear? Because I just get a feeling that when drivers win after a very, very long time or just win for the first time in history, they just they're driving, and the way they approach it and the way they talk to the media and the way they talk to the engineers on the radio, you can just tell that they're exponentially more confident in their ability than they ever have been. And that confidence was seemingly down for Leclerc for a quite long time. Now that he's won, you see, we could see a different Leclerc.
That's a brilliant example, because for being Charles Leclerc, who, Jacques Villeneuve has very famously said, everyone's treating him as a world champion, even though he's not won. Okay.
No.
To have these wins, to be able to show he's able to put it in, not make a mistake, get Ferrari to execute a race and a qualifying the way he wants, and then to, of course, win in Monaco, which is an even bigger high for him. I'd love to see how it sort of, takes the weight off his shoulders, gets him to challenge, Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, and Carlos Sainz as much as he can. Because we should also remember, each time Max loses a race, he actually comes back with a vengeance as well. So could it also be that Max Verstappen is waiting to strike back and show everyone that, hey, like Singapore 2023, this is just another blip this is just another blip in my ultra dominant career, or whatever you call it. But if you believe in numerology, here's a fun one. Okay, the 2024 Formula One season is 33.33333% completed. Could this work in favor of driver number 33? Driver 33, of course, is Max Verstappen. Even though he uses number 1, number 33 is still reserved for him. So technically, if numerology works, it could be his race weekend.
Yeah. That'll be fun. I mean, just where Sergio Perez ranks up in that whole battle, how close McLaren are, what sort of a race do Ferrari have? Mercedes and Aston Martin, less said the better, to be honest. It's going to be another tough weekend all the way around. Again, it'll help, but there's less heat in Canada compared to all the other circuits, which, according to Mercedes, plays in their favor. But apart from that, it's all a bit of a mystery, right?
It is. And I'm going to just say one last thing on Max Verstappen. So I have family actually going to the race this weekend.
Oh.
Okay. And my cousin, whose name is Jos, and I'm not making it up, his name is Jos. And he was named after Jos Verstappen. Okay. Because he's 8 years younger to me. No, 7 years younger to me. And
is he
then
Indian?
Yeah, he is Indian.
An Indian guy named Jos.
Yeah, so his Indian name is Jash.
Okay.
But,
Yeah.
ever since growing up, because of Jos Verstappen, I always call him Jos the Boss. So Jos the Boss is taking a whole bunch of family people. We were planning to visit as well, but I can't be elsewhere during an F1 weekend, so I'm not visiting with them. But that's the Jos and the Verstappen connection that I have with my family racing there. But I know you switched to Mercedes, the cooler conditions. I think the other aspect about Mercedes, which everyone's going to want to look out for, is Lewis Hamilton saying, I don't think I'm going to outqualify George in 2024 at all, ever. So everyone's going to sort of try and understand what he meant, why he meant that. And 7-1 is clearly the number that's bothering everyone, saying Lewis has been outqualified by George Russell seven times in the 8 races this season.
One for every world
Interesting.
championship.
Wow, that's painful.
That hurts. That hurts. Yeah.
But like Mark Hughes, the famous Mark Hughes, right? He actually broke it down. He fuel adjusted their gaps, and the actual gap between Russell and Hamilton is 0.062.
Wow.
Which is the second closest gap amongst all the drivers from the first 8 races of the season. The closest gap is between Norris and Piastri, which is 0.042. Okay. So actually, the gap isn't as much. It's just that George is qualified ahead, and I'm sure lots of conditions that come in, new front wing, old front wing, some execution related, traffic related issue, etc. No excuses, but these are the numbers that the teams look in. And for context, the slowest or the largest gap here is not Albon and Sargent, Sommel. The largest gap is Verstappen Perez, 3/10 in qualifying.
Wow. And an extension is coming, apparently. Believe me.
That could probably be it, right? There is some Mercedes thing where they're saying, not Mercedes, or Red Bull is going to start a broadcast and make some sort of an announcement about, hey, there is some news coming in. Could it really be Sergio Perez? It is being, the paddock believes that an extension is coming his way, a 1-year contract extension, to see where it all falls in. I believe if his extension is coming in, there is a slight hint that Max will continue to stay, because they wouldn't want to not take Carlos Sainz if he's available, which he is, if Max Verstappen's going away. So that could probably be the piece of the puzzle which might fall in place. Slowly and steadily, the driver market is falling in place. But a bit bummed that Yuki Tsunoda, for all the performances he's had this year, will actually not be a beneficiary of those performances. So for the record, Yuki's been in Q3 6 out of the 8 races this season, which is just the same number of times as Lewis Hamilton, and is actually more than Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll. So this is just qualifying. Okay. If you were to consider the amount of contribution Yuki's made to AlphaTauri, or rather Racing Bulls as they are called now. Okay, Racing Bulls has got 24 points already in 2024. In just the first 8 races of the season, they are just 1 point away from their total tally in 2023. And guys and girls, you all remember, it's not Daniel Ricciardo who's been the one who's scoring. Okay, it's actually been Yuki Tsunoda who's done the heavy lifting. And I know everyone remembers Ricciardo's 4th position in the sprint in, it was in Suzuka, I guess, right? But we've got to remember, Ricciardo is one of the only 18 drivers who scored points to have not scored in a Grand Prix, but have scored in a sprint format. So Daniel Ricciardo has, of course, got 5 points, but Yuki Tsunoda has got 19 points, which is 8 more than Lance Stroll.
8, that's crazy. In a car that's clearly not as good.
In a car that's clearly not as good. The bottom 4 of the teams, I would say, if you were to put it as that. Even the bottom 4 teams, Samuel, they've all finished 11th at least once this season. This means Williams, Sauber, who else is there? Haas, Racing Bulls, you count all of them. They've all finished 11th, and that itself shows that they've got the pace, and it's just a very, very tight field. But the other driver I really want to have my eyes on is Fernando Alonso. He's been outside of the points for the last 2 races. And even though he, funnily thought he was racing for 10th place in Monaco, he realized he wasn't 10th only after the checkered flag dropped, right? But the last time Fernando Alonso finished a race but was outside of the points, 2 back-to-back races, was in 2021 in Spain and Monaco. So typically around Spain and Monaco and this time of the year, something happens, there's a dip in form, and then he'll just rise back from the ashes.
We'll see. Canada is normally one of his better circuits. Qualified second here last year. I think he's won here before as well. Has he not? But he's generally
Yes, he has with
yeah, he
Renault
has
in
with Renault.
2006.
Exactly. He's generally quite good. Yeah. But before we move on to talking about Esteban Ocon, we need to firstly thank one of our reviewers, and that has to be Tonchir, who's listening to us from the USA via Apple Podcasts. And he says, love these guys. As an American, I fell in love with Formula One and started listening to a bunch of the podcasts, but no longer. All but one or two of them have fallen off my lists. And these guys are so interesting, mostly stats and fact driven, as opposed to gossip and chat. They know what they're talking about. Thank you, Tonchir. I mean, yeah, these things get you to carry on all the time, don't they?
Yeah, my goodness. Thank you very much. Let me just throw a stat, just because the stats and facts have been appreciated on our show. 6 different drivers have had the fastest lap in the last 6 races, if that helps. And like I said, 18 drivers have scored points, and Ricciardo is yet to score in the Grand Prix format. Okay, but all eyes on Esteban Ocon. What a heartfelt apology. Or was it heartfelt for you? Did you feel for him, Samuel?
I don't know. I just get confused when people use words like, I'm deeply saddened by something. Have you ever been deeply saddened by something, Kunal? Can you ever be deeply saddened by something?
It depends if it's a personal loss, but yeah, let's not. I don't know. It's not his first language, English. Maybe his PR agent has written it for him. But yeah, I mean, all the abuses, all the hate, funny, which is on social media unwanted, and everyone's trying to pull him down and stuff, and not call him a team player. Which Fernando Alonso has not been called as well for the longest of times.
But not that you have to be all the time. Sometimes it's better not to be one, but given the circumstances, given the scenarios, given the 2 incidents, not just one in Monaco, it's pretty fair for the kind of backlash he receives internally. But externally, all that.
Yeah, I just remember one in the race.
Oh, so before they had the crash at Portier, Ocon also went to the inside of Gasly and they almost crashed.
Really?
That was going up the hill. Yeah.
But no, I thought it was the other way, that Gasly tried to put him in not put him in the wall, but squeeze him a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So they almost collided, yeah.
Gasly made the first attack and then Ocon just lost it at Portier or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly.
But I think the Bruno Famine statement that came about, considering consequences, may not race in Canada, was all Drive to Survive led. I strongly believe so, because I don't think a driver ever in the history of the sport has been asked to sit out. I don't think the contract necessarily covers these kind of situations, because eventually you're always going for a gap that exists. He'll say, I saw a gap and I went. It just so happened it was my teammate. Yep.
So, and how do you fight that in court? Like, basically, if it all comes to it that in one time, which for some drivers it might, how do you prove that in court? Like, what do you do? It's hard. Because at the end of the day, it's a contract, right? And it's all legal terms. So the legal terms will say, if the driver misbehaves or causes any intent to harm the other driver, which is again grey and subjective, like the rules of our very sport, and then that is a court case that could go on for a long, long time. And correct me if I'm wrong, Grosjean being forced to sit down in 2012 was also a penalty point thing, not a demotion or something like that.
No. It was because of those 12 points on the penalty license, which is what Kevin Magnussen is trying to avoid desperately. And,
but he must be on 11, right? He's
on 10. He's on 10. He actually, I don't know how he missed out in Monaco. So one more race, he's got to wait and hope that he doesn't really get anything. But on a final point, before we get to predictions, we've heard of, Alpine has sacked somebody somebody who's been with the team for a long time. Simon Resta has left Ferrari after 23 years, joining Mercedes. So the typical Formula One teams, you hear of things like these, right? Engineering people leaving, going, coming, etc.
Yep.
But here's a Formula One team called Andretti, dying to get into Formula One. They have hired 2 American lobbying firms to assist them in their efforts to have the US Congress put pressure on Formula One. Can you imagine They've not even made it to Formula One, but they've created two new jobs in a Formula One team, which is to get a lobbying firm, which is pretty typical for American businesses. Let's keep that in mind. But
And
everyone's chasing Adrian Newey. But guess what? We are going to first get those lobbying firms out there.
but they also got someone on the Formula One sporting regulation board. Basically, they got Pat Simmons.
Yeah.
He's the one who was influential in designing these regulations for the current gen of Formula One cars. And after he's done with his stint at Formula One, he goes back to Andretti. Like, that is wild.
Big ticket moves.
That's a big ticket move for a team that literally has no entry.
Yeah.
It's wow, man. This is, I think, the biggest non-entry saga that we've ever seen in Formula One. We had USF1 almost get the entry, not really work out. Story of that was on the Inside Line F1 podcast. We had Peter Windsor share that, and also Bob Varsha. So lots of fun stuff on that team. But the 2010 teams coming in, that was a big story. We saw some major teams trying to come in, come out, but never to this scale. Like,
No.
ever.
Absolutely. Never to this scale. Two lobbying firms, just the way it goes. But on that note, why don't you tell me, do you think a driver, this is going to predictions,
Yep.
do you think a driver is going to get in the Wall of Champions this weekend?
No, never happens. It's too rare. I don't think so. And Lance Stroll has driven here enough, so I think he should know it by now.
But he's not a champion, so
Hey, Formula 3 European champion in whatever year it was. He's won something. Something.
yeah, okay.
And he's a champion for surviving in a seat for so long. Takes a lot.
That, oh goodness me, you're leaving the best for his home race weekend. I can sense that. But who do you think is taking pole?
Paul, I'm actually going for Ferrari. I'm going to go for Leclerc this time as well. Who's your money on? I'm going Ferrari for pole and Verstappen for the win. Like another Leclerc pole Verstappen win. So
One
we
for
haven't seen that
the
for a
history
while.
books. Yeah, it's
One
been a
for the
while,
history
right?
books.
I get a feeling McLaren will be the team chasing Red Bull. McLaren may be squeezing in a pole, maybe Oscar Piastri stitching his laps and sectors together, putting it on pole. And then, when those DRSs come in and the efficiencies of those DRSs are so good on the Red Bulls, that I think Max will then take the win.
Let's see.
Could it be that he wins from P3 after both the McLarens take 1-2 in qualifying? Maybe.
Maybe, yeah. That'll be a good weekend, yeah. Let's hope for something exciting to this scale when we see the racing this weekend in Canada. But of course, we'll be back with the Canadian GP review immediately after that. So be right here on the Inside Line F1 podcast. And thank you for listening. Share it to every and any friend or family member who could be interested in this. And let's expand our community further. See you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Inside Line F1 podcast. Before we ended, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Amazon Music once again for partnering with us on this episode of the podcast.